She stood in the office where she had fallen in love, where she had laughed, teased, and given her whole heart to a man whose hands were stained with secrets older than their love. The photograph in her trembling fingers showed two people smiling, unaware that in 3 years they would be dead. Her parents, young, happy, completely unaware that the man their daughter would one day love came from the very family responsible for turning them to ashes. He told her once that the most dangerous lies are not the ones people tell you. They are the ones they keep from you while looking you straight in the eyes. She laughed when he said it. She thought he was being dramatic. She was not laughing anymore. But before we witness how everything shattered, we need to go back to the beginning. To the morning Hazel Monroe walked into the lion's den with nothing but $17 in her bank account, a grandmother's wisdom, and absolutely no idea that the lion had been waiting for her all along. 6 months before that devastating night, on a cold March morning in Chicago, Hazel Monroe pushed through the revolving doors of Corsetti Imports, wearing a blazer she had purchased from a thrift store on Halsted Street. Her shoes pinched. Her resume was a creative work of optimism, and her bank account contained exactly enough money to buy groceries for 3 days if she skipped lunch. Hazel was not what anyone would call cautious. Her grandmother, Nona Ruth, had raised her in a cramped Brooklyn apartment that smelled perpetually of garlic and defiance. The old woman stood barely 5 feet tall, but possessed a personality that could fill a stadium. She taught Hazel 3 essential things: how to make the perfect marinara sauce, how to laugh when life gets hard, and how to never let any man see her sweat. Men are like pasta, Nona Ruth used to say, waving her wooden spoon like a royal scepter. You gotta boil them a little before they soften up. Hazel had buried her grandmother 14 months ago. The last of her family, the last person on earth who loved her unconditionally. She carried that grief like a stone in her chest, but she also carried Nona Ruth's fire, and that fire was about to walk straight into the most dangerous situation of her life. The lobby of Corsetti Imports glimmed with Italian marble and money that asked no questions. Hazel approached the front desk where a severe woman with pearls that could pay rent for a year looked up with barely concealed disdain. "May I help you?" asked the receptionist, her voice clipped and cold. Hazel flashed her brightest smile, the one she used when she was terrified, but refusing to show it. The receptionist blinked, clearly uncertain how to process this. "Take the elevator to the 14th floor. Mr. Corsetti is expecting you." In the elevator, Hazel's heart pounded against her ribs. She needed this job. Needed it like oxygen, like rent money, like proof that losing Nona Ruth had not broken her completely. So she did what she always did when terror threatened to swallow her whole. She decided to be completely, recklessly herself. If they did not like it, at least she would go down swinging. The 14th floor was quieter than the lobby, the kind of quiet that costs money and demands respect. Hazel approached the massive oak door marked with gold letters D. Corsetti, CEO. She knocked twice. "Enter," came a low voice from inside. She pushed open the door and stepped into her future.
The office was massive. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago River, gray and churning under the March sky. Bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes stretched toward the ceiling. And behind a desk that could double as an aircraft carrier sat Dominic Corsetti. He was 34 years old, though he carried himself like someone who had lived several lifetimes. Dark hair, darker eyes, and a face that seemed carved from something harder than stone. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Hazel's entire wardrobe, and when he looked up at her, she understood immediately why this man made people nervous. He radiated power the way other people radiated warmth, constant, unmistakable, and slightly dangerous. What Hazel did not know, what she could not possibly have known, was that Dominic Corsetti had inherited more than this company from his father. He had inherited an empire that operated in shadows, a network of loyalty and fear that stretched across the eastern seaboard, and a legacy of blood that he had spent his entire adult life trying to escape. He was the head of one of the most powerful crime families in Chicago, and he had recognized her name the moment he saw it on her job application. But Hazel Monroe knew none of this. All she saw was an intimidating man in an expensive suit, sitting in an office that desperately needed some natural light. "You're the new assistant," he said. It was not a question. "That's me," Hazel replied, walking further into the room and looking around with undisguised curiosity. "Nice office. Very intimidating. Is that the point, or did the decorator just have a vendetta against natural light?" He stared at her. A muscle in his jaw twitched. "Excuse me?" "I'm just saying, a few plants wouldn't kill anyone. Maybe a fern. Ferns are very non-threatening." She extended her hand across his desk, her smile never wavering. "I make excellent coffee, I'm pathologically organized, and I'm told my personality is an acquired taste. So, let's acquire." For a long moment, Dominic did not take her hand. His dark eyes studied her with an intensity that would have made most people stammer and retreat. Hazel simply waited, her hand extended, her expression pleasant and completely unintimidated. Finally, he spoke. "You understand who I am?" "You're my new boss. You sign my paychecks. Beyond that, I'm sure I'll figure it out." She tilted her head, studying him right back. "Also, you have spinach in your teeth." Dominic's hand flew to his mouth before he could stop himself, and then froze as he realized what he had done. He did not have spinach in his teeth. He knew this because he had not eaten spinach in 3 days. Hazel grinned. It was a real grin, slightly crooked and entirely unrepentant. "Just kidding. Wanted to see if you had a sense of humor." She lowered her hand, since he clearly was not going to shake it. "The jury's still out." She turned and walked toward the door, then paused at the threshold. "I'll get started on your calendar. Fair warning, whoever organized it before me should be tried for crimes against logic." And then she was gone, leaving Dominic Corsetti staring at the empty doorway like he had just witnessed a small hurricane pass through his carefully controlled world. His right-hand man, Vincent Palermo, appeared moments later from a side office. Vincent was in his 40s, had been with the family for 2 decades, and had seen things that would give most people nightmares. But right now, he looked concerned. "Boss, everything okay? Want me to handle anything?" Dominic was still staring at the door where Hazel had disappeared. "No," he said slowly, something strange flickering in his dark eyes. "No, I think I'll handle this one myself." Over the following weeks, Hazel Monroe did something that nobody in Dominic Corsetti's world had done in over a decade. She treated him like a human being. On her 3rd day, she placed a coffee on his desk with a sticky note attached. The note read, "Reminder, blinking is optional, but smiling won't actually cause physical pain, probably." Dominic read it. His expression did not change, but he did not throw it away either. He slipped it into his desk drawer, where it joined a growing collection of her ridiculous messages. On day 8, she walked into a meeting with some of the most dangerous men in Chicago. Men whose names were whispered in certain circles, men who had done terrible things and would do terrible things again. She carried a tray of espresso and addressed Romano, a feared enforcer with scars mapping his face and a reputation for violence that preceded him everywhere. "Sugar?" she asked cheerfully. "You look like a 2-sugar kind of guy, am I right? I'm always right about these things." Romano, who had once bitten off a man's ear in a dispute, blinked at her in complete bewilderment. Then, inexplicably, he smiled. "3 sugars, actually," he admitted, his gruff voice almost sheepish. "See? Close enough. I'm Hazel, by the way. Love your tie. Is that silk?" From across the room, Dominic watched this interaction with an expression hovering between horror and fascination.
Vincent leaned close to whisper, "Boss, she just asked Romano about his tie. Romano, the man is a walking nightmare." "I am aware," Dominic replied, not looking away from Hazel as she charmed a room full of criminals without breaking a sweat. On day 15, Dominic opened his filing cabinet and discovered that every single drawer had been relabeled. The new labels read, "Important stuff," "Really important stuff," "Stuff that looks important but probably isn't," and "Mysteries of the Universe," and "Receipts." "Monroe," he called out. She appeared in the doorway, the picture of innocence. "You bellowed?" "What is this?" "Organization. You're welcome. Also, I found 14 staplers in your supply closet." 14! What were you planning? A stapler army? A stapler uprising? "If you tease me again, there will be consequences." Hazel did not even blink. "What kind of consequences? Are you going to make me reorganize the supply closet?" "Too late. Already did it. It's beautiful now. It sparks joy." Silence stretched between them. Dominic stared at her, this fearless, ridiculous woman who had somehow invaded his carefully constructed world and refused to be intimidated by any of it. And then he laughed. It came out rusty, unpracticed, like a machine that had not been used in years, finally grinding back to life. But it was real. For the first time in longer than he can remember, Dominic Corsetti laughed because something was genuinely funny. Out in the hallway, Vincent Palermo froze mid-step. He actually crossed himself because in 20 years of service, he had never heard that sound. The boss was laughing.
4 weeks after Hazel started working at Corsetti Imports, she found herself sitting on the building's rooftop, eating a sandwich and watching the city lights glitter below. The door opened behind her. She did not turn around. "Stalking your employees now?" she asked. "HR would have thoughts." Dominic approached, loosening his tie as he walked. "How did you know it was me?" "You walk like you're perpetually late for a meeting where you're going to fire someone." He sat beside her, not close, but not far either. The air between them hummed with something neither of them wanted to name. "Why aren't you afraid of me?" he asked. Hazel took a bite of her sandwich, chewing thoughtfully before she answered. "Should I be? Most people are. Most people are boring." She set down her sandwich and looked out at the skyline, her voice growing softer. "My grandmother used to say that the scariest people are usually the loneliest, and lonely people don't need more fear. They need someone to actually see them." Dominic was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, rawer than she had ever heard it. "What if what they see isn't worth seeing?" Hazel turned to look at him then. Really look. The city lights reflected in her eyes as she studied his face. The hard lines, the guarded expression, the weight he carried so carefully that most people never noticed it at all. "Then at least they won't be alone when they figure that out," she said. Something passed between them in that moment, something unspoken and terrifying and impossible to take back. Dominic looked away first. "You should go home," he said, standing abruptly. "It's late." "You know, for a terrifying businessman, you're kind of bad at this whole scary thing," she called after him as he walked toward the door. "Good night, Monroe," he replied, without turning back, and disappeared into the stairwell. Hazel sat alone on the rooftop for a long time after that, smiling to herself in a way that was softer and more uncertain than her usual grin. That was the night she realized something had shifted between them. She told herself it was nothing. She was very good at lying to herself.
What Hazel did not know, what she could not have known,
was that Dominic Corsetti had spent 3 sleepless nights before her first day of work, staring at a file that had been locked in his father's safe for 20 years. A file with her parents' names in it, Henry and Clara Monroe, a young couple from Brooklyn. He was a dock worker who had stumbled onto information about Corsetti's shipping operations and made the fatal mistake of talking to the FBI. She was a seamstress who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Dominic's father, Enzo Corsetti, had given the order. The fire was ruled accidental, a factory blaze that claimed 2 lives and left behind a 6-year-old orphan who would be raised by her grandmother in a cramped apartment that smelled of garlic and love. Dominic was 19 when it happened. He had known nothing about it at the time. He was not involved. But he had discovered the truth years later, buried in his father's records, and the knowledge had haunted him ever since. When Hazel's application crossed his desk bearing that familiar surname, he should have rejected it immediately. He should have ensured their paths never crossed. Instead, he found himself pulling the old files, needing to see what his family's sins had left behind. He did not expect her to be this fierce and funny and utterly unafraid. He did not expect her to make him feel human again. He did not expect to fall in love with her. And now he was drowning, and he was not sure he wanted to be saved.
2 months into her employment, on a quiet evening when most of the staff had gone home, Hazel heard voices coming from a conference room. The door was slightly ajar. She approached without thinking, curious about who would still be here this late. Through the gap, she saw Dominic surrounded by men she did not recognize. The conversation was low and intense. "The Calabrese family is moving product through the South Side," one of the men was saying. "If we don't respond—" Dominic cut him off. "We respond with precision. No civilians, no collateral. I'm not my father." Hazel's blood ran cold. In that moment, everything clicked into place. The excessive security, the nervous deference everyone showed him, the way certain visitors looked at Dominic like he was either their salvation or their death sentence. She stepped backward, and the floor creaked beneath her feet. Every head in that conference room turned toward the door. 15 minutes later, Hazel sat across from Dominic in his office. The air between them was charged with something that had not been there before. Knowledge, fear, the weight of secrets exposed. "How much did you hear?" Dominic asked carefully. "Enough to understand why you have 14 staplers," she replied, and despite everything, a ghost of dark humor flickered in her voice. "You probably took them from people who owed you money." Dominic did not smile. His eyes searched her face, looking for the fear he had seen in so many others. "You should be running right now." "Probably." She did not move. "Are you going to hurt me?" he asked. "No," he said immediately, fiercely, "never." "Then why would I run?" A long pause stretched between them. Dominic looked almost pained, like her lack of fear was somehow worse than terror would have been. "Because I'm not who you think I am," he finally said. Hazel leaned forward in her chair. "Then tell me who you are, the real version, no walls." He was silent, and she continued. "You fund 3 orphanages across the city. Yes, I found those records. You call your mother every single day, even when you're in meetings. You keep every stupid note I leave on your desk. I noticed, Dominic.
And you laugh at my terrible jokes when you think I'm not listening." Her voice softened, but her gaze remained steady. "I've seen monsters. I grew up in Brooklyn. I know what cruelty looks like. You're not that." "You don't know what I've done, what my family has done." "Then tell me." The words died in his throat. The truth sat between them like a bomb with a silent timer, but he could not bring himself to detonate it. Not yet. Not when she was looking at him like he might actually be worth saving. He said finally, and the defeat in his voice was palpable. Hazel stood and moved closer. She reached out and took his hand. He flinched at the contact, not from pain, but from the shock of tenderness. But he did not pull away. Instead, he held on like she was the only solid thing in his crumbling world. "I'll wait," she said softly, "until you can." "You shouldn't trust me," he whispered. "Probably not," she smiled, sad and knowing. "But my grandmother always said love isn't about should. It's about anyway." The word hung in the air between them. Love. Neither of them took it back. What followed over the next 3 months was something neither of them planned and neither of them could stop. Dominic taught Hazel to make his grandmother's recipe in his penthouse kitchen, and she got flour on her nose and made him laugh so hard he nearly burned the sauce. She fell asleep on his office couch during a late work night, and he covered her with his jacket and watched her sleep with an expression of terrified tenderness he would never have let anyone else see. Their first kiss happened in the rain, outside the office building, desperate and inevitable. She tasted like coffee, and he tasted like everything she never knew she needed. They woke up tangled together in his bed, morning light streaming through the windows, her head on his chest and his arm wrapped around her like he was afraid she would disappear if he let go. For 3 months, they lived in a bubble of stolen moments and willful blindness. Dominic told himself the secret did not matter. Hazel told herself she did not need to know everything about his past. They were both wrong. The truth found her on an ordinary Tuesday evening. Hazel was searching for a file in Vincent's office while he was out. She rifled through the desk drawers, looking for quarterly reports, when her hand brushed against an unlabeled folder tucked at the very back. Something made her pull it out. Something made her open it. Inside, she found newspaper clippings from 22 years ago. A factory fire in Brooklyn. 2 dead. A young couple survived by their 6-year-old daughter. And beneath the clippings, a handwritten note in Italian, signed with a name she recognized immediately. Enzo Corsetti. Dominic's father. Someone had penciled in a translation beneath the Italian script. The Monroe problem has been handled. The fire will be ruled accidental. A photograph slipped from between the pages and fluttered to the floor. Her parents, young and smiling. The same photograph that sat on her nightstand at home. Hazel stopped breathing. Her parents did not die in an accident. They were murdered. By his family. The folder slipped from her fingers and hit the floor like a sound of a gunshot in the silent office. Dominic found her in his office later that night. She stood at the window, silhouetted against the Chicago skyline, the rain streaking down the glass like tears. The photograph of her parents was clutched in her trembling hand. "Hazel?" He approached slowly, sensing immediately that something had shattered. "What are you doing here so late?"
She did not turn around. Her voice was too calm, too controlled. "When did you know?" "Know what?" She turned then, and he saw her face, tear-streaked but composed, with something harder in her eyes that had not been there this morning. She held up the folder. "When did you know?" Dominic saw the folder. The color drained from his face. "Hazel, was it before I started working here? Was it before you kissed me? Before you told me you loved me? Before you held me and let me think I'd finally found someone who—" Her voice broke, and she could not finish. "I knew before you started working," he admitted, each word pulled from him like a confession. "I saw your name on the application, and I pulled the old files. I needed to understand." "Understand what? How to manipulate the orphan whose parents your father murdered?" "No." He stepped toward her, desperate. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I didn't plan to feel—" "Don't." She backed away from him. "Don't you dare say it now." Silence fell between them, broken only by the rain pounding against the windows. "You knew," Hazel said, her voice quieter now, but somehow more devastating. "Every single day, every time I talked about them, every time I told you how much I missed them, you knew who took them from me, and you said nothing." Dominic's face crumbled. "I was going to tell you. I tried so many times, but every time I looked at you, I couldn't bear to see you look at me the way you're looking at me now. Like a liar, like a coward, like a monster."
He sank into a chair, his head falling into his hands. "I was 19, Hazel. I didn't know about the fire until years later. I had no part in it. When I found out, my father was already in Sicily, retired, untouchable. I've spent my entire life trying to be different from him, trying to build something that isn't soaked in blood." He looked up at her, and his eyes were wet. "And then you walked through that door, and you made me believe I could actually be someone worth loving." "You should have told me," she said, her voice cracking. "You should have given me the choice." "Would you have stayed?" A long, terrible pause stretched between them. "I don't know," she finally admitted. "But at least it would have been my choice." She moved toward the door. Dominique stood. "Hazel, please, I love you. That part was never a lie." She stopped, her hand on the doorknob, her back to him. "My grandmother used to tell me that love isn't about should, it's about anyway." Her voice trembled, and when she turned, tears were streaming down her face. "But she also taught me that some things are unforgivable. Not because the person is evil, but because trust, once shattered, you can't just glue it back together and pretend the cracks aren't there." She opened the door. "What happens now?" he asked. "I don't know. I need to not be here. I need to not see you." "For how long?" She walked out without answering, and the door clicked shut behind her with a finality that echoed through the empty office like a death knell.
Hazel did not eat for 3 days. She did not sleep for 5. She moved into a small apartment in Lincoln Park, far enough from the shadow of Corsetti imports that she could almost pretend the last 6 months had never happened. She replayed every moment, every conversation, every kiss, searching for signs she should have seen, lies she should have caught. But the truth was simpler and more devastating than any mystery. He had loved her, really loved her, she was certain of that. And he had still chosen silence over honesty. One week after she walked out of his office, Hazel stood before her grandmother's grave
in a Brooklyn cemetery. The headstone read, Ruth Monroe, beloved grandmother, she loved without fear. I don't know what to do, Nona, Hazel whispered, kneeling to touch the cold stone. I always said love was worth the risk, that the right person was worth fighting for. But what if they're also the person who destroyed everything? What if loving them means betraying the people I've already lost? The wind rustled through the cemetery, but no answer came. I'm pregnant, Nona. The words fell from her lips like stones, and a sob escaped her chest. I found out this morning, and I don't know if I can look at this child every day and not think about what his family did. But I also don't know if I can look at this child and not see the man I still love. She pressed her forehead to the gravestone. How is that possible? How can I love someone and hate what they represent at the same time?
3 months passed, the seasons changed, and Chicago transformed from gray winter to brilliant autumn. Leaves scattered across sidewalks, and life moved forward, indifferent to heartbreak. Hazel was sitting alone in a small cafe one afternoon, her hand resting on her stomach, now showing the early signs of pregnancy, when the bell above the door chimed. She looked up automatically. Dominic stood in the doorway. He looked different, thinner, the sharp edges of his face more pronounced, as if something had been carved away from him. He carried himself like a man who had been running on empty for months. Their eyes met, and the cafe seemed to fall away. I didn't follow you, he said quickly. I promise. I was just walking. I walk a lot now. A pause. I can leave. Hazel studied him for a long moment. This man who had lied to her, this man she had loved, this man who was the father of her child. Sit down, she finally said. He approached slowly, like she might change her mind at any moment, and lowered himself into the chair across from her. The distance between them was only a table, but it might as well have been an ocean. His eyes dropped to her stomach, and his face changed. Shock and hope and grief all tangled together. You're... Yes. His voice cracked. Is it mine? Hazel looked at him, and something like exhausted anger flickered in her eyes before fading into something sadder. What do you think? Dominic closed his eyes, and when he opened them, they were wet. I'm so sorry. I know those words mean nothing. I know they can't undo anything, but I need you to know. Stop, she interrupted. She took a breath. When she spoke again, her voice was calmer but fragile, like ice over deep water. I've spent 3 months trying to figure out how to feel about you, about us, about this. She gestured to her stomach. And here's what I've realized. I can't forgive what your family did. I can't look at you and not think about my parents, what they could have been, who they could have become, all the years I lost with them. Dominic nodded, bracing for the final blow. But I also can't pretend you're a monster, she continued. You didn't light that fire. You didn't even know about it until years later. You've spent your whole life trying to be different from your father. Her voice wavered. And you loved me. Really loved me. I know that. I've always known that. I still do, he said desperately. I still love you. I know.
That's what makes this so impossible. Silence settled over them, heavy with everything they had lost. What do you want me to do? Dominic asked. I'll do anything. Walk away completely, be part of the baby's life, whatever you need, whatever makes this easier for you. Hazel looked at him for a long moment. I want you to tell me the truth, she said. One more time. Not about the past, about the future. What do you actually want? He was quiet, and when he finally spoke, his voice was stripped of all pretense. I want to watch our child grow up. I want to be there for the first steps, the first words, the first heartbreak. I want to spend the rest of my life trying to be someone worthy of the love you gave me, even if you never give it to me again. His voice broke. I want a second chance. Not to erase what happened, just to prove that I can be more than my family's sins. And if I can never fully trust you again, she asked, then I'll spend the rest of my life earning it, one day at a time, one truth at a time. Silence stretched between them. I'm not saying yes, Hazel finally said. I'm not saying I forgive you. She reached across the table and took his hand. We start over, she continued, completely. No secrets, no walls. You tell me everything about the business, about your past, about every skeleton in every closet. And if I find out you've lied to me again, even once, we're done. Forever. You'll never see me or this child again. I understand, he said, nodding fiercely. I swear to you, Hazel. No more lies, no more silence. A ghost of her old humor flickered in her eyes. Also, you're going to therapy. Non-negotiable. He let out a startled, wet laugh. Therapy? Lots of it. You have enough baggage to fill an airport. I'm not dealing with that alone. They did not get the fairy tale ending. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no sweeping declarations of perfect love. What they got was harder, messier, and more real than any story. Their daughter was born on a snowy evening in December. They named her Ruth, after the grandmother who had taught Hazel that love could soften even the hardest hearts. Dominic held his daughter for the first time with tears streaming down his face, and Hazel watched him with an expression that was equal parts love and wariness, because some wounds never fully heal. They just become scars you learn to live with. They got married in a small ceremony the following spring. Hazel wore her grandmother's ring. Dominic wore a smile that his colleagues would never have recognized. But the marriage was not perfect. Some nights, Hazel would look at him and see the shadow of his father's sins. Some nights she would wake from dreams about fire and loss, and look at the man sleeping beside her and wonder if she had made a terrible mistake. They fought. They forgave. They fought again. Dominic went to therapy, just as she had demanded. He stepped back from the darker aspects of his family's business, focusing entirely on legitimate operations. He was trying. Every single day, he was trying to be the man she believed he could become. And Hazel learned something her grandmother had never taught her, something she had to discover on her own. Love is not about perfection. It is not about finding someone without shadows. It is about choosing someone whose darkness you can live with, someone who fights every day to be worthy of the light you see in them. 1 year after Ruth was born, Hazel sat by the window of their apartment, holding her daughter and watching the city wake up. Dominic came through the door, groceries in hand. You forgot the diapers, she said. He froze. I did not forget the diapers.
She raised an eyebrow. He checked the bags and deflated. I forgot the diapers. 14 staplers, 0 diapers. Your priorities remain fascinating. He laughed, that same rusty, beautiful sound from their first weeks together, though it came easier now, and crossed the room to kiss her forehead and take Ruth from her arms. I'll go back out, he said. You'd better. As he headed for the door, she called after him. Hey. He turned. I love you. Still complicated, still scary, but still true. He paused, letting the words settle over him. I love you too, in all the ways I don't deserve to. He left, and Hazel turned to look out the window at the city where she had found him, the lion's den where she had fallen in love. She never fully forgave him. Some wounds leave scars that ache when the weather changes, reminders of old injuries that healed but never quite disappeared. But she chose him anyway. And every day, in small ways and large ones, he proved that her choice was worth making. On the shelf behind her, 2 photographs sat side by side. One showed her parents, young, smiling, unaware of what was coming. The other showed Ruth's first birthday, her tiny hand wrapped around Dominic's finger while Hazel laughed at something off camera. The past and the present. The loss and the love. Both were true. Both were hers. Some stories end with happily ever after. Theirs ended with we're still working on it. And honestly, that was the most honest ending she knew.